I've talked to so many people who are experts in gunfire, have heard the recordings, they've looked at the reports, and there's a consensus that's forming. First of all, the official narrative of the 223 ammunition being used is false. It's false for a number of reasons that I've listed before, and I'm not going to go into them now because I have talked about them ad nauseum, and you can see, basically reference these in past broadcasts and past writings on thecommonsenseshow.com. But suffice it to say that there is a consensus forming that there were actual machine guns used, not automatic, but machine guns, MG60s for one, although that has been disputed by people that claim they have credentials. But all the people I talk to that have credentials are saying, Dave, sounds like an MG60. And they talk about how the suppressors wouldn't work at an angle going down and so forth. So the official narrative has been blown up. But there's even more evidence coming to light. And I said I was not going to get into the forensic evidence to such a detail that we lose sight of the overall picture. However, some of the forensic evidence I'm going to talk about here is extremely relevant to the Las Vegas situation. Let's get into some of the specifics right now. There are multiple reports, eyewitness accounts of shots fired in the Bellagio hotel entrance. We also are hearing about reports of gunfire in Caesar Palace at the same time as the Mandalay Bay massacre was going on. So when we look at these reports, this was a well-coordinated activity, and for some reason, the attackers broke off the attack on the other hotels, probably for logistic reasons that are still, at this time, unknown to us. Now, I had communications today with an ex-CIA agent, and he was telling me that, Dave, you have done a good job, but we're 5 years away from really knowing the truth. I don't know if I agree with that. I respect this person's opinion greatly, and he's been right on a lot of things that he's told me in the past. But what I'm really concerned about here is the fact that there are a lot of anomalies with people who are in positions related to some of these institutions connected to these killings, and their behaviors are suspect. For example, why is the CEO of Mandalay Bay, why did he sell off his stock a few weeks ago? Why? Good question, isn't it? You know, this is the same kind of behavior I saw with the Great Gulf Coast Holocaust with the BP oil spill in 2010, where BP sold off its stock. And we saw President Obama, who was involved in Vanguard 1 and 2 investment firms, sold off his stock. Yeah, like his people that were managing his funds, or perhaps the ex-president himself, knew what was coming. We saw the same thing with Transocean. In fact, Transocean, that owned the oil rigs, actually did a put option on the very day the oil rig blew up. So we're looking at very similar behaviors right now with people in ownership positions. Now, also, too, the owner of Mandalay Bay has ties to Antifa, and I'm going to be developing these, and I'm not going to go into great detail on this particular broadcast because these are investigations in process, but I am satisfied of what I'm saying. But when you make a claim like this, you have to go the extra mile to prove the claim. As Carl Sagan used to say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. And I'm in the process of accumulating this, but the trend curve is very clear. And fortunately, many of my colleagues in the independent media are agreeing with these assessments. We are on the same page, people. And we are also seeing now that the police calls with regarding the the traffic confirmed that there were multiple shooters, and some of those tapes we know now are being doctored and they're disappearing. So now we're seeing basically a JFK situation where we're seeing the doctoring of evidence after the fact, like losing the president's brain, for example, because he was shot with a hollow point, and that wouldn't match Oswald's gun, and you get the idea. But we're seeing the same kind of behavior again. But I want to go back and repeat what I said a couple of times on broadcast this week. Prior to the show, I was given clear and concise information, and now the facts are beginning to come out to support what I was told. Antifa, which had made threats of civil war and mass violence a few days earlier, On Sunday before my show at 3 p.m. Pacific, I was given specific information that Antifa was joining with MS-13, the political hitmen for the Mexican drug cartels who are tied to terrorist groups like ISIS, and Antifa was partnering with ISIS. Well, we're seeing now that ISIS is claiming that the shooter, the alleged shooter, was compromised and radicalized as long as 6 months ago. I don't know if that's true. I've not been able to confirm that, but I will tell you those associations with Antifa exist. Antifa is a subversive, dangerous organization, and I believe they should be an organization of interest. And if we were really going to have an honest investigation into these events in Las Vegas, it would start with Antifa. Antifa needs to be declared to be illegal. The leaders of Antifa need to be arrested, and they need to be banned from using any public communications because they're actively recruiting Americans to do what we're talking about. In fact, if you have followed my articles this week, as well as my podcast, you'll see I've gone out of my way to document how that's happened. In fact, going back 3 years ago to a person at the University of Washington who was connected to ISIS, who was actively recruiting Americans and American kids, young adults, to engage in ISIS-like activities. And we had the tweets to prove it. So it wasn't speculation or rumor or hearsay. We had the tweets where this person was claiming, and then when she got exposed, she had to go underground, and the tweets were canceled. Fortunately, most of us kept copies of those tweets. This is turning into a quagmire of facts now coming out. But here's what we have done in the independent media, and here's what we have done through the cooperation of our audience that has spread the truth that we've tried to put forth on places like YouTube, as well as on our various websites like thecommonsenseshow.com. What we have done is we've put the authorities in full retreat. They're now saying, in effect, that this man could not have done all this shooting. Now, I'm paraphrasing. This morning I heard on KTAR News at 7 a.m., and that would have been the morning of October 5th. At 7 a.m. on their news, they were interviewing a sheriff from Clark County, and he was saying, we can't discount the fact that there aren't multiple shooters involved. Well, that's a nice way of saying the official narrative has been blown up. It's a polite way of saying it. The real truth of the matter is anyone who knows anything about gunfire knows what this was. Now, let's look at this going forward. In a future broadcast, what I'm going to talk about is what this means for America. This is not a standalone event. And I want to go back and draw another parallel to the Kennedy assassination. In the aftermath of Kennedy's death, we got Vietnam, the silver certificates were taken away, and that benefited the Federal Reserve and David Rockefeller. And we also saw the fact that we had increased nuclear arms spending after both Khrushchev and Kennedy had agreed to reduce the same. And I could go on, but there was definite movement made to benefit the pockets of then the global elite in 1963. This is different. This is an event that may lead to some political chicanery and profits, but it's going to be a lot more than that, and I'm going to report on that on a future broadcast. Anyway, I want to thank all of you for actively forwarding many of my videos and articles, and also doing the same for several of my colleagues in this business, because we have the dog by the tail, and we are getting close to the truth. And the other side knows it, and they're panicking. This is why Google worked so hard to shut us down on YouTube, as well as limit us on their search engine, which controls 80% of all internet traffic. Isn't it interesting that they did that censorship prior to an event like this?